We all love a good twist. Watching the seeds of a twist blossoming into an astounding revelation can lift any narrative experience, if done well, of course. Sadly, games, like any other storytelling medium, can occasionally lose the plot, literally. In this feature, we'll be talking about twists in games that made no sense, or maybe some that did make a smidgen of sense but blew anyway. Note: obviously, there are spoilers in this feature for every game mentioned. If you see us beginning to discuss a game you don't want spoiled, skip ahead to the next entry. Heavy Rain. Heavy Rain was a legitimately great game, and a great showcase for choice and consequence mechanics and narrative-driven gameplay in Quantic Dream titles. But it wasn't perfect, of course. The entire game revolved around the mystery of who the origami killer was, but it was eventually revealed that it had been Scott Shelby all along. Except that doesn't make any sense, because we'd been playing as Scott Shelby for a huge chunk of the game, and were privy to his thoughts and inner monologues and whatnot. It just came across as a poorly executed reveal. Bionic Commando. The 2009 Bionic Commando revival had a lot of issues, but the one that took the cake is how, for some reason, it felt the need to give a bizarre backstory to your bionic arm. What made it so bad was that it wasn't even a cool backstory that would make sense. It was revealed instead that Spencer's wife, who'd been presumed missing the entire time, was actually part of his bionic arm, so that it could connect to him properly on both a physical and an emotional level. Super Mario Bros. 2. The "it was all just a dream" shtick has been done to death by this point across all media, and it's almost never a good idea. It cheapens the investment you've had in the game entirely, and essentially just ends up saying, none of it mattered, it was all meaningless. And that's exactly what Super Mario Bros. 2 did. Sure, we don't play Super Mario for the story, nor is it ever much of a focus, but couldn't it have come up with literally anything else? Metroid Other M. As a game, Metroid Other M is a decent enough experience, but as any veteran fan of the series will tell you, there's just so much that it gets wrong. Most of it revolves around the game's narrative, and one particular twist about Mother Brain exemplifies that perfectly. Madeline Bergman, being an android clone of Mother Brain, is horribly tropey and stupidly predictable, and all in all, a perfect microcosm of the game's entire ridiculous story. Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 3 was an accomplished shooter, and for the vast majority of its runtime, it did a lot of things right, except its final 15 minutes when it delivered one of the most infamously disappointing conclusions in gaming history. Finding out that everything to do with the Reapers, their ominous cycle of galactic genocide, and all the struggle that ensues is ultimately because of space magic was a disappointing gut punch. For good measure, BioWare also decided to make the Catalyst, the representation of said space magic, look like the child Shepard had been having nightmares about, and this only made it that much more confusing. Metal Gear Solid 4: Guns of the Patriots. Metal Gear Solid 4's convoluted plot and its multiple Deus Ex Machina moments have become well known to one and all by this point, but the one we're talking about in this feature specifically is the reveal about Liquid Ocelot's persona, and how he isn't Ocelot possessed by Liquid Snake's severed arm at all, which was a pretty ridiculous premise to begin with. No, in fact, Ocelot did that to himself thanks to a combination of hypnotherapy and, you know it, nanomachines. All so that he could fool the Patriots into believing that it was actually Liquid who was working against them. The Patriots, in spite of being an all-powerful global network of all-seeing and all-knowing AI, somehow bought into this whole story. Sly Cooper: Thieves in Time. The key to pulling off any twist properly is making sure that it doesn't seem like it's coming from nowhere, that it follows from actual proper foreshadowing that subtly hints at the real nature of the story, even if audiences might not catch it the first time around. The twist about Penelope and Sly Cooper: Thieves in Time didn't get this memo. After convincing us, very blatantly throughout the game, that Penelope had been abducted against her will, the game decided to flip the switch and reveal that she was actually mad at Sly and that she'd left on her own. Ratchet & Clank Future: Quest for Booty. Dr. Nefarious is one of Ratchet & Clank's most beloved villains, so we'd all love any opportunity to see even more of him, right? Well, not if you shoehorn him into the story the way a Quest for Booty did. The game revealed at the end that Zoni had been working with Dr. Nefarious the whole time. This came after no build-up, no foreshadowing, and barely any mentions of Dr. Nefarious throughout the entire game at all, and yet the game just decided to drop this vital piece of information on you for shock value anyway. Mega Man X8. Mega Man X games had one thing in common. Almost all of them anyway. Sigma was always the big bad. It's the way of the series. Even though someone may seem like the main villain, the big bad ultimately turns out to be the same guy. Dr. Wily in Mega Man, and Sigma in Mega Man X. So Mega Man X8 decided to pull out the rug from under us and revealed that Sigma had been nothing but a pawn all along, and wasn't the big bad this time. It was such an obvious attempt at shocking the fans, and one that didn't fit with the context or with the previous game, or even with this one at all, that it definitely deserves a place on this list. Starfox Adventures. Starfox Adventures threw a final twist at players that could be looked at as fan service, but it just ended up being, to put it bluntly, stupid. The game revealed that the game's main villain, General Scales, wasn't the main bad guy at all, and it was Andross who was the real big bad. Except Andross was canonically dead and had barely even been mentioned throughout the entire game. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. You know exactly what this is about. While almost everyone expected the Phantom Pain to chronicle the events of Big Boss's life between Peace Walker and Metal Gear 1 and show how he fell from grace and went from being a war hero to a global terrorist, that's not what we really got. What we got instead was a game that fooled us into thinking we were playing as Big Boss, except we were just playing as Mr. Random Dude, who, thanks to plastic surgery and hypnotherapy, no nanomachines this time, had been fooled into thinking he was Big Boss. Oh well, at least now we know how Big Boss survived the ending of Metal Gear 1, right? Wonder Boy in Monster Land. The Wonder Boy games were magical adventures that saw us fighting against fantastic beasts, and Wonder Boy in Monster Land had been building up to this climactic battle against a fearsome dragon. The twist? The dragon wasn't a dragon. It was a robot from outer space. Yes, really. We don't know how it made any sense, and sure, this isn't a game where something like this can impact your enjoyment too much, but it was disappointing nonetheless. Batman: The Telltale Series. Batman: Enemy Within was praised highly by fans, but while the second season in Telltale's adaptation of the beloved character was received well, the first season did a lot of really stupid stuff. For instance, take Vicky Vale, a character who'd been a steadfast ally of Batman and Bruce Wayne in some capacity or the other throughout the character's history. What does this game do? It turns her into an evil, vengeful maniac who's actually the ultimate big bad of the entire game. Time Crisis 5: True Mastermind Edition. Time Crisis 5: True Mastermind Edition saw Robert Baxter, protagonist of Time Crisis 2, being revealed as the game's main villain, having killed several of his allies. The only problem was the game didn't bother elaborating on that, or telling us how the hell that even happened. None of it fit within the timeline, Baxter's motivations were never properly explained, and it was painfully clear that the twist was in there just for the shock value. Pokemon Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire. Again, Pokemon isn't a game where you care much for the story, though the Hoenn games definitely focused on narrative a great deal. But this one was particularly bizarre. The side character, Mr. Bonding, you'd be excused for not remembering who he even is, suffers from guilt over having fired people from their jobs at the Mauville Corporation, because of which he feels powerless now, seeing as he can't do anything about it. 5 random men come up to him and decide to give him the power he needs, which he then wants to share with people throughout the world, by fusing with him. I know it sounds weird, and that it makes no sense, but that's the point. This is literally what the twist was. And that wraps it up. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We upload new videos daily. Also, don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon, that way you don't miss out on any of our videos.